Evening. My name's Elizabeth Gessel, and I'm the Director of Public Programs here at Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco. And I want to welcome you today to African Diaspora Film Club. This series occurs monthly with Cornelius Moore, who's the co-director of California Newsreel, the 52-year-old social issue nonprofit film distribution and production company. He is also an independent Black film curator specializing in works from around the Black world. This program's modeled after a book club, so we expect that you'll have watched the film Ralph Ellison, An American Journey in advance of today's discussion. And if you haven't, that's okay. We might have some spoilers, but you can join us and you can watch the film later. As I said, we'll be discussing the wonderful documentary Ralph Ellison, An American Journey. And we're thrilled to have joining us for the discussion the writer and director Avon Kirkland. Avon Kirkland survived a poverty-stricken childhood in the Deep South to graduate from Clark Atlanta University and Washington University in St. Louis with a PhD in chemistry in 1964. After working as a scientist and publishing executive, he decided to pursue an unlikely career in television in 1974. His goal as a producer, director, writer was to counter commercial network depictions of negative Black stereotypes and develop realistic programs that explore the rich history and culture of African Americans and their pivotal contributions to the American democratic experiment. Kirkland wrote, directed, and produced Ralph Ellison, An American Journey, the feature-length documentary about the author of the classic American novel Invisible Man. The program was an official selection of the 2002 Sundance Film Festival. It was broadcast on PBS by the Emmy Award-winning series American Masters and received a rave review in the New York Times and elsewhere. Among the many honors he has received, Kirkland is proudest of one bestowed by Morehouse College, an honorary doctorate in humane letters in 2005 for his works featuring the lives and achievements of African American leaders. Kirkland is currently retired and lives in Berkeley, California. So please join me in welcoming Cornelius Moore and Avon Kirkland.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Hey, Avon.
Hey, Cornelius.
Well, thank you for bearing with us and with this technical problems. I think this is not a film. This is all audio. It's their problem. But anyway, and you just had a birthday. I'm going to wish you belated happy birthday, and ask everybody else to do that too.
I'm 84.
Okay.
Going on 94.
Well, first I want to thank you for making this great documentary, which encourages me to read Ellison's work, and I think it probably has the same result for a lot of other people. The way I wanted to structure this conversation was to first begin talking about the film and your work on it and its stories from that. And then, because you have such a very fascinating life and career, to go into that. But
Right.
so that, yeah, okay. So I thought I'm beginning to talk about the documentary Ralph Ellison, An American Journey. That you told me that several people had approached Ralph Ellison to make a film about his classic novel, Invisible Man.
On this classic novel.
Yeah, and that the people were including Sidney Lumet and Quincy Jones.
Braugher.
Yes, and Frederick Wiseman, and that surprised me. But that Ellison refused them all. And so my question is, why do you think he refused them, and why did Ellison's estate and literary executor, who's Jonathan Callahan, why did he give you the go-ahead?
Well, Ellison refused because he thought that the story and the meaning and the contours of the plot and change that happens in the in the book would be Balderized. He felt that he had seen Richard Wright's Native Son converted or adapted to a movie and thought that it was a terrible misjustice done to the novel. And so he was not interested in his book, which is longer and more complicated in structure and in many other ways. It's a very introspective book. That invisible man, who is never given a name in the book, by the way, his journey from a southern region where segregation was the law of the land to New York, and we follow his journey as he begins it in the South.
Okay.
So how did I get it?
Yeah. So how did you?
Well, in late 1980s, I called Ellison's agent and asked if the movie rights for the book were available, and he informed me that Mr. Ellison would not grant movie rights to anyone. He had received many offers and declined. And as far as I was concerned, that was that in the late 80s. I then proceeded with another film I was working on, Simple Justice, title, 2-hour-plus dramatization of the story of the Brown decision and how Thurgood Marshall traveled from being a sort of happy-go-lucky law student to becoming a really excellent attorney, and who led the effort, helped devise the effort, and led it to victory in the landmark Supreme Court case, Brown versus Board of Education, Topeka, 1954. The way I got it was after I finished Simple Justice, I did my first documentary. It was about a local boys club, the Omega Boys Club of San Francisco, and its charismatic leader. I had never directed a documentary, and so it was experimental for me. I'd see what would happen. I'd pull in somebody if I needed help. But we followed the Omega Boys Club and their work with kids in trouble with the law, and how they were able to get those kids to go to school, not commit crimes, and eventually go to college. And they are well known now for that work, which continues. They are one of the favorite charities of Oprah Winfrey, for example. And Joe Marshall published a book based on his work at the Omega Boys Club called Street Soldiers. So I felt kind of comfortable with the documentary style at that time. And Ralph Ellison died during the making of that movie, which started in 1994. I finished it around 1997. So I called Ellison's agent again because I wanted to do a documentary, not an adaptation to a dramatic film. And his agent reminded me of what I said, but he encouraged me to make a documentary about Ellison because, of course, that would bring Ellison to the attention of many who hadn't heard of him although Ellison had won the National Book Award in 1962, the first African American to win one. And in the late 1960s, his book was chosen by a large group of literary experts to have been the best novel published in the last 20 years, that is, since 1950. And among the writers he bested were Saul Bellow, Ernest Hemingway, and on and on. So I was able to convince the agent to put me in touch with the literary executor that had been appointed to look after Ellison's work and what was done with it from the point of view of Ellison. Basically, is it true to Ellison's works, short stories, novel, whatever? You named him John Callahan, professor at University in Oregon, and I called John, and he said, a documentary on Ellison? He says, well, what have you done? I said, well, I recently had on the air Simple Justice. And he said, you did Simple Justice? I said, yes. He said, that's a wonderful program. I teach it in a course I give here at the university. And that started a series of conversations that eventually let me represent to public television, to American masters, to other funders, that I had permission of the estate to work on a documentary about Ralph Ellison. The second call I made after that was to American masters. And I said, would you be interested in a documentary on the life and work of Ralph Ellison? They said yes, and we have been for a while, and we've had proposals, but we didn't think much of them. If you send us a summary of what you intend to do and how much it costs, we'll give it consideration. Well, I had that ready, and I sent it to them right away. And I got a call back from them in 2 or 3 days. They said, we're interested, and to put our money where our mouths are, we will give the production $150,000 for it to premiere on American Masters. I said, thank you, I will proceed. And I did proceed to try to raise money for the documentary. And I was successful. We got money from some Ford Foundation? Several foundations, National Endowment for the Humanities, and we were off and running.
Okay, well, congratulations. You know, it's an excellent documentary. I had a question about the dramatics, the dramatizations that I noticed that filmmaker Elise Robertson had made a short film from the Ellison story, The King of the Bingo Game, which you excerpt from in the movie. And she directed the dramatizations from Invisible Man. I was curious why you didn't do it yourself, why you had her do it. Why you asked her to do it.
Well, I had never directed drama. I had written scripts. I had created dramatic programs. My entry into PBS as a producer was, in fact, a dramatic series called Up and Coming, which I believe Elizabeth mentioned. which preceded the Cosby Show, and which was intended to portray black people that I knew that I never saw characterized on television. The series that starred Esther Roll and Jimmy Walker, you know, Dynamite.
Good times.
That the clown.
Mm.
That was typical of the kinds of black images we saw on the screen, almost to the exclusion of any other kind of drama or television fictional production.
Mm. But you asked her to do it because had you seen the short film that she made and then decided to ask her?
Yes. Okay, how did we get permission, despite Ellison's wishes all during his life after publishing the book? How did we get permission to produce segments, short segments, from this 500-page novel?
Mm-hmm.
I went to the agent and I said, we have permission to do the documentary and John Callahan's cooperation, but we need to dramatize a few scenes from the book. And the agent said, well, you better talk to John about that. John Callahan was very interested in the documentary. And so I called him, of course, and I said, John, we are off and running with the documentary. We're raising money. People are excited about the prospects. And we need to do some selected scenes from the book in order to demonstrate how and why the book is great. He said, well, Ralph didn't, Avon, Ralph didn't want that to happen. I said, John, nobody's going to watch a film about Ralph Ellison in which people talk about the book, only talk about the book, but no one sees anything. So he agreed eventually to let us do a select small summary, a select small number of scenes from the book, and he would have script approval.
Okay.
So.
Well, you're very convincing. Get people to do what you want.
That's the name of the game. But John was sensible too. And remember, he thought I'd done a really good job on the Brown Show. And besides, he had script approval. So what we did was to script and eventually shoot about 7 or 8 scenes, depending on how well they would work in the story we were telling about Ellison's life. We actually wound up with 40 minutes of edited dramatic material. But of course, we weren't going to present all of that to Mr. Callahan, Dr. Callahan, because he wouldn't approve that much. But we shot that much because we thought we could use pieces of almost everything we shot, and that it wouldn't amount to more than 15 or 20 minutes altogether, and that we could get approval on that. In a rough cut. So we proceeded to do that, and Elise Robertson did a very good job on a very low budget for these scenes, and we were able to get some really good actors, including the actor who played the father
in Good Times, right?
Good Times.
Yeah, John Amos. Yeah.
He played the Booker T. Washington type character. in Invisible Man, and he
Okay.
did a very good job.
You did. So I just want to remind people who are participating and watching that they can put in questions in the chat, and we'll get to some of the questions. And I got a note saying that people can understand you. I can understand you. Maybe if you hold the phone next to you, really close to you, that would be better, so there'd be for less feedback. Question.
My
Yeah,
mouth?
yeah, maybe that would be better. So in the film, in the documentary, scholar Clyde Taylor says that after reading Invisible Man, and he realized, I'm quoting from him, that Black fiction could be so wonderful, and that the raw material that existed in Black life that could make literature that great. He was astounded by that. And so I was curious if you had a similar reaction to reading Ellison, and was that part of the inspiration for you for making the film about Ellison?
The book is a great book by any sort of angle of estimation. It's also very long. It's quite a journey for Invisible Man. The features that stand out for me in the novel, if that's what you're asking,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Ellison was careful to make sure this book did not have flaws that he felt Black.
Mm-hmm.
Native Son did.
Mm-hmm.
Native Son showed a young man who fit a stereotype.
Mm-hmm.
After all of his struggles, he got no further than being a stereotype. And as some of the participants in this may appreciate, he wound up killing a white woman by accident, and that was it.
Mm-hmm.
His butt was done for
Mm-hmm.
at that point. Ellison wanted a more intelligent man. He wanted a man who struggled, if necessary, through difficulties that he as a Black man encountered from all kinds of people, Black, white, and otherwise. And he does so with beautiful language. Ellison studied poetry at Tuskegee, which is where he went to school, before leaving it after 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And he read early Hemingway. He read all of the masters of literary fiction, English, American, whoever. And he developed quite a talent. And that talent shows through in the book. So what was really important about this book, published in 1952, written by a Black man, is that he was not your prototypical Black victim who could not escape various pitfalls that were put in our way during that time. Again, the book was published in 1952. This is before Brown versus Board of Education. This was before the Montgomery bus boycott. This was before the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Civil Rights Movement, March on Washington in 1963.
Okay. So when I was reading other things his essays, and I noticed that Ellison is quite the cultural critic, literature critic, and also he really always weaves in his love of Black culture, particularly jazz, and that for me in your film that you evoke that in a lot of the scenes, and even from the very beginning, and with the soundtrack by Marcus Shelby, who's, for people who in the Bay Area, they know his work, and maybe people or not, he's very celebrated artist, jazz artist here. Um, um, a question I have about the way you end the film, that you have Toni Morrison reading from Juneteenth, which was the unfinished and finished after Ellison died novel, his second novel. So I was curious how you arranged all that.
I arranged to have Toni Morrison read from Ellison.
Yes, because it's quite I think it's a great ending.
Second novel?
Yeah.
I got lucky.
Okay.
John Callahan, after Ellison died, looked at about 2,000 pages of novel that didn't hang together. They were drafts of Ellison. They were all over the place. But John found within those 2,000 pages what he considered a good story with a beginning, middle, and end. And he was able, with Mrs. Ellison's approval, to publish that. And as it turned out, CBS became interested in the reading sponsored by Barnes and Noble at a bookshop in New York that would feature Toni Morrison, another Peter Mathiasen, the novelist, and somebody else, I've forgotten. But Toni Morrison was the attraction. She rarely appeared in public light, but she was a great admirer of Ellison. In fact, I know from people who have been to her apartment in New York that she had a picture of Fanny and Ralph Ellison hung in her house. I don't think it means anything that they were hung in a bathroom. But she greatly admired Ellison. And the piece she read from the book was, I think, some of Ellison's best writing, 15 or 20 pages. And it's about Black women who work as domestics and nannies to white babies. You've seen those typical pictures of Black nannies with white babies. He wrote very movingly of how the love from these Black mothers aided white kids in developing themselves as good people who know love and attention, because often the white mother didn't have to do a lot of stuff mothers have to do. They had other things to do. And as Toni read it, it was very, very poignant. I actually hired a videographer to record the entire event. However, it turned out when he showed up, he didn't have the right equipment. However, CBS had a crew there too. And as it turned out, I knew the director. And in fact, I asked him to shoot something he wasn't planning on shooting.
Mm.
That was a poster advertising the event. And he did that after the presentation. And when I got back to my office in Berkeley and looked at the footage that we nevertheless got from the cinematographer I hired, but it turned out to be like I thought it would be, really not very good. So I called my friend at CBS and I said, "Do you have that footage?" He said, "Yes." I said, "I want to use an excerpt from it." He said, "Okay, I'll send it to you, Avon, but you can't tell anybody where you got it."
Okay, but don't tell anybody now.
Not a deal.
Yeah, well, that's great. He's probably moved on, right? And CBS probably doesn't remember any of this.
He's probably retired by now. We're
Yeah,
talking
right.
about 20 years ago. And
Yeah.
so I recommend that those who haven't seen the documentary to look for it. I know that here in Berkeley, for example, I gave 2 copies of the show to Berkeley, as I do with all the shows I do, because, and in fact, Berkeley Library declared an Invisible Man Day, and they gave away 250 copies of the Invisible Man paperback, and followed that up with an event at the Berkeley Library in which I participated.
Uh-huh.
And I did see some people on the Berkeley walking around with Invisible Man in their hands. And that was great. So the San Francisco Library probably have it. And as you know, because you are a distributor, many, many colleges and high schools, graduate schools have the show and use it in their instruction.
Well, one of the questions, I did see one question, and I think you've maybe answered it. They wanted to know, did you interview Cornel West and Clyde Taylor in person? And I think the answer is yes.
Yes. My interviews were in person.
In person.
Clyde Taylor and Cornel West were great. And Cornel and I had a lot of fun. We cut out a part of one of his speeches because he was having so much fun. He reached up to give me a high five, and we did it. And we had to cut that out of what, because it wouldn't work. I interviewed everybody.
Yeah, it's pretty. There, I'm gonna go to another question. Question about the story behind the filming of the Battle Royale segment.
What about it?
Well, the question is that what's the story behind the filming of the Battle Royale segment?
Ellison was reflecting in the Battle Royale.
Wait, I'm sorry. Yeah, Royal.
Battle Royale?
Royal, yeah.
Okay. That was a not infrequently done activity in the South at that time. And what was the question about it?
Well, what's the story behind it? Maybe, and I think maybe the I mean, you could. You were getting to it in the sense of what that segment represented.
The segment represented one way that the white South could embarrass black strivers, and they rationalized that if they gave them help in going to college, that was all right. So the Battle Royal represented something that Ellison was aware of in the South when he went to Alabama from Oklahoma to go to college.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a lot of fun doing it. Part of the Battle Royal, at the end of the Battle Royal, what's supposed to happen, we filmed, but somebody took it out of the distribution of the show, and I'm suspecting it was you and your colleagues, because
No, it's on there. It's in there.
after the Battle Royal,
Yeah.
where these guys, black guys, blindfolded are boxing each other, and the last two,
Mm-hmm.
they take the masks off and they fight. After that,
Mm-hmm.
these boxers are marched into a room where there is a naked white woman
Oh,
dancing.
okay.
We shot that.
Mm-hmm.
The actress who played the naked white woman insisted that she had to have a sort of long red banner to hide certain parts of her body as she danced, and we allowed it.
Oh.
But it's in the original scene.
That must have been coming out from PBS. It wasn't from California Newsreel. And if it was from California, our contract says we can't do anything like that. So so
Well,
it's
I'm good to hear it,
good. Wouldn't do that. Question about was Ellison's wife alive when you finished and began the documentary? Did she have any input in the documentary?
Mrs. Ellison was not alive
Okay.
when we finished it, and she did not see it. She died. He died in '94. She died, I think, in 2000, 2001, something like that. The documentary was finished at the end of 2001.
Mm-hmm. This is a.
She was cooperative, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
When I interviewed John Callahan, who's in the show, it was in Ellison's apartment in New York, where Mrs. Ellison was still living.
Mm-hmm.
The apartment was typical of Ralph Ellison, was mid-century modern. The special kind of furniture, very expensive, that's now come back into popularity 50 years later.
Mm-hmm.
She was there off camera, and she thanked me for doing a documentary about her husband, and she wished us well. John Callahan was responsible for her cooperation. She trusted him.
Mm-hmm. People can still submit questions about the film, but I wanted to start asking you about yourself because I'm fascinated that you grew up in Florida, then you went to college in Atlanta, Clark, Atlanta, but focused on chemistry. You even got a PhD in chemistry in St. Louis, but then you switched to filmmaking, which is sort of not the usual kind of trajectory. So, share something about that with us, why you made those choices.
My twin sister, Avon, and I were born in 1936, 1 month after our father died. So my mother was left with us and an older brother in the midst of the Depression, in the Deep South, and alone with 3 children to take care of. So we weren't expected to be high achievers, my sister and I, but both of us achieved that. with the help of many aunts and uncles. My sister worked her way through Grady Hospital Nursing School in Atlanta, and I worked my way through Clark, Atlanta University now. I would not have been able to go to college if an aunt and uncle in Atlanta had not said to me, why don't you come to Atlanta if you want to go to college? They knew that I wanted to go to college, but that we had no money. They said, you can come and live with us. We'll feed you. And if you can raise your tuition, you can go to college. And that's exactly what I did. I finished with very good grades, a scholarship, a grant to go to graduate school. And I chose to go to Washington University in St. Louis, where I earned a PhD by my mid-20s. I worked after completing my degree in the mid-60s at an oil company research lab just outside of Chicago. I was a senior chemist making more money per month than my mother ever made in a year. And about 3 years into my work there, I had become extremely bored. Let's back up a little bit. In graduate school, I became exposed to knowledge and speakers about everything, that most of which my college couldn't afford. Celebrated professors would come and give lectures on this, that, and the other. My whole mind expanded in terms of possibilities. At the same time, Martin Luther King was coming along with the Montgomery bus boycott and all of the activities that he headed until his death. With the Brown decision in 1954, with Martin Luther King's March on Washington, Civil Rights Act in 1964, and the Voting Rights Act a year or so later, black equality became the focus of many of us. And as a matter of fact, I had been reading widely in the field as a graduate student in chemistry. And when I came out and worked as a chemist, I continued that reading, and I got bored with chemistry. I was interested in doing something in the movement. I resigned my position. I accepted a position as head of a Chicago Foundation effort to improve learning opportunities for African American children who lived in projects, and you know they're all over Chicago. The 2 study centers that I established, got running, were considered very successful because kids who lived in the project only had to go downstairs or to the next building to get to books, and rather than 10 blocks away. The Chicago Public Library, the next year after that, did 6 more of those things based on our success in getting kids to check out books and so forth. By that time, I had decided I wanted to live in New York, and I moved to New York, and as luck would have it, I was hired by an educational publisher to implement educational projects in public schools there. I did very, very well. The experience in Chicago helped, but I'm talking to people just like I was when I was their ages in schools. And our reading projects, which included program learning materials, parent involvement in the learning process, in the school, teacher training, etc. We succeeded in gaining huge contracts in many school districts. 3 years into that, I decided that that wasn't close enough to what I wanted to do. And I took a year off to decide how I could become involved in the civil rights movement. During that year off, mostly what I did was work on my tennis backhand and watch television. And when Good Times and Sandy came on, and I watched them, at some point I said, I can do that. So I wrote a script for Sanford and Son and was able to get the producer to read it. He said, we like your idea. Unfortunately, we've already done a program that's sort of centered around the topic that you suggested about. But if you have other scripts or ideas, if you want to pitch some stories, I'll be glad to. That was very unusual. You usually did not get to pitch stories to producers.
Exactly.
Your agent got that hearing. By that time, I learned that there was a position open at KQED in San Francisco for a director of instructional services, which meant programming the station for schools during the day. I applied for that job and got it. I think it helped that I was black, and I think it helped that I had a PhD. I changed the programming quickly and successfully. And one of the programs that was most popular was one about life coping skills for children. It's called the affective domain, as opposed to the mental, intellectual. It's our emotions rather than our intellect. And it seemed to me that such a series for black children would be very useful, that treated problems that I'd seen all my life and in every job I had, etc. And so I wrote a proposal that took some time to the Department of Education in Washington. The name of the series was Up and Coming, and it was about a striving black family. And as luck would have it, my first proposal for production was successful. They gave us $2.5 million for one season of shows. That was 15 shows, and they were successful. Up and Coming ran on the nationwide on the in prime time, got great reviews many places, and we were funded to do a second series of 10 shows. So that's how I got involved and started in television. And now I had raised all that money, and at the end of that second series, I said, wait a minute, I'm raising the money, and KQED is getting 25% of what I raise as overhead. I think I'll form my own organization, and that's what I did. I founded New Images Productions here in Berkeley. Our first program was Booker, a 1-hour show about Booker T. Washington as a little boy, dealing with slavery, the end of slavery, and the beginning of freedom, and ultimately getting a chance to go to school. And that book won many, many, many prizes. As soon as PBS rights were exhausted, the Disney Channel bought it. They ran it. They got the rights to distribute the program from the very beginning to schools and so on. And frankly, it's one of the best programs we ever did. So that's how I got started.
And I noticed that in the among the films that you've done, if a Booker, you talked about Simple Justice, right? About the Thurgood Marshall and the struggle against Jim Crow, and Sam Cooke Crossing Over. You put executive producer of that, and Street Soldiers, which you mentioned. And so, but you, as producer, you've gone back and forth from documentary and drama. So how do you do that? And
You
do
have
you have
an idea, and you take it as far as you can. And if you need help from others, you pull in somebody. For example, Simple Justice, I was very fortunate that the PBS series American Experience became interested in the dramatization of the Brown decision as I proposed it. And right up front, they gave us $450,000 of a $2.6 or $7 million show. That did two things to PBS. I mean, two other funders. They got American Masters involved. That means it's going to be prime time and part of this very successful series. And so that's why we did Simple Justice.
There was a question here about, is your company still operating, and do you accept proposals or scripts? You still want to be an executive producer?
Probably not. I've asked to help on certain projects, but I've done so informally. In the meantime, frankly, I have a show on a documentary on the life of Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois that I have not finished. And I didn't finish it because we couldn't raise enough money for it. And I'm still working on it in my mind. I got to make it more dramatic. And then maybe, with so many broadcasters these days, online and all, but mostly online and cable, I should be able to find somebody. So we'll see what happens.
But aren't you kind of maybe unofficially retired?
I am officially retired.
You're officially retired.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. There's no more questions here, but I had a question about maybe because we're getting almost close to ending.
Yes.
I was back to Ellison. I was wondering if you had any thoughts or things that you discovered in making the film about why Ralph Ellison, what were the obstacles for him for not being able to do his second novel? Of course, there was the tragedy of his house burning down with a lot of most of the manuscript. But what else did you discover about that challenge for him?
Let me put in a plug here for the DVD of the show that California Newsreel distributes. In addition to the documentary, we have a series of extra segments that deal, among other things, with Ellison's struggles to finish his second novel. And to bring it down to, just a sentence or two, he was trying for too much. He was trying to write the great American novel, comparable to, say, what's the novel? What's the novel with Nigga Jim in it?
Huckleberry Finn?
Yeah, Huck Finn. A great novel. Even Nigga Jim doesn't act like the stereotypical Negroes who post-dated him.
Mm.
Ellison had a lot of distractions too. He taught at New York University for a while, good while. He spoke all over the place, and he got he wrote and wrote and wrote, and I say about 16 years after the publication of Invisible Man, his summer cabin caught on fire while he and his wife were out having dinner with Saul Bellow. And all of his manuscript was destroyed in the fire.
Mm.
So he had to start from scratch.
Mm.
But he was still trying to do something very, very ambitious and didn't finish it before he died.
One of the, and thank you for that. Thank you for that answer. And I'm going to paraphrase a question that came in, but there was one of the things I think I read about Ellison, he didn't want his work to be considered within a protest novel genre, and he was saying that it's hard to hold a pen with a clenched fist. And the question that came in was about, do you think if Ellison were writing today, do you think he would be accused of being an elitist? And do you think also now that Black authors are still expected to write protest work?
He was accused of being, sort of Uncle Tom.
Mm.
When the Black Power movement started in the 60s, led by Stokely Carmichael and others. But that was too harsh a criticism.
Mm-hmm.
He was he carried himself with a lot of hauteur. His head was high, he was always dressed immaculately, and he didn't suffer fools quietly.
Mm-hmm.
But he had feeling. When he learned that the Brown decision had been made, he cried.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody who knew him knew that, but he cried. And we knew it because his wife told somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Brought him to tears.
Mm-hmm.
During the Black protest movement, they were very harsh on people who were not banging the drum and raising their fists, etc., etc. Ellison was striving for great art and truthfulness in his characters. And the second novel was going to have some of that kind of thing in it. In fact, Ross the Destroyer in Invisible Man is an expression of that.
Mm.
Again, the book was published in 52, right?
Mm. Right.
12, 15 years before the Black protest movement. Ross the Destroyer wound up not only pushing people to be activists, but also killing people who disagree with him.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, Invisible Man enters that basement hole. We see him going down into being chased by Ross the Destroyer.
Mm-hmm.
So Ellison was a very sentient person, but he didn't show it to a lot of people who wanted him to express his desire for Black progress, Black racial equality in his own terms.
Mm-hmm.
And you see people like Toni Morrison and Alice Walker and so on doing that. There's a lot of interiority in their characters.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for the answer to that question. And I think there's one maybe final question about the a scene in Invisible Man about the magnetization of the floor with young black men on it, which I don't remember.
The magnetization?
Yeah, magnetized floor.
I don't remember that.
Okay, I didn't either, so I thought I'd ask the question.
A lot of cruelties were suffered by Invisible Man, but that one I don't remember.
Yeah, and I did read about the Ross character, and there was a question about if, I mean, it was clearly Ross was a West Indian character, and that if there was any kind of Rastafarian connection with that.
No, I don't think so.
No, okay.
Ross the Destroyer was Malcolm X 50 years early. He spoke on corners. He urged people to fight for their rights, physically if necessary, and so on. And he had a whole set of, his folks had uniforms, and they chased people on horses. It was Leroy Jones didn't do that.
Right.
I mean, Mary Baraka. So
if you have in closing, do you have any advice for Black filmmakers and writers?
Go do it.
Okay.
By the way, let me just say this. I looked at the Ellison show last night for the first time in 10 years. And it was amazing to me how relevant it still is. Just think about Donald Trump in the last 4 years. People need to appreciate the emotional lives of black people. We're not crooks and this and that, every bad thing and all of that, on welfare, etc. There's a lot that Ellison says that applies to now. Or as Stanley Crouch says, in the additional materials on the DVD that you guys distribute, he said Ellison's message to black people were, if you got the grits, serve them.
Okay. Right. That's a great way to end. Thank you so much for your time today and for your work. And people can find your work.
Who else is tuning in? Is there any way for me to see who's tuning in?
I can't show you everyone, Avon, but I can send you a list of people who were on the program.
I would be interested.
Absolutely.
Okay. And thank the audience for bearing with us with the technical problems.
Thank you all so much.
You're very kind. My pleasure. Happy holidays.
Yeah.
Thank you. Happy holidays to you too, Avon. And before everyone leaves, I just want to tell you what's coming up next. We're very excited to announce a new partnership with Black Public Media. Together, we will be presenting the first of 2 African Diaspora Film Club programs in January. The first is at our regular time. It'll be Sunday, January 10th at 5 p.m., and we will be discussing the fabulous documentary Mr. Soul about Ellis Hazlipp's groundbreaking public television show Soul, and producer and director Melissa Hazlipp will join us for the discussion. We will also have a special edition of the African Diaspora Film Club on Sunday, January 24th at 7 p.m. That'll be a little bit later, 2 hours later than we usually do it. We'll be discussing the brand new award-winning documentary Softy about the provocative photojournalist Boniface Mwangi. and writer and director Sam Soko will join us for that discussion. Both of these films are not available on any regular streaming channels, but we have a special access for you through a platform called Eventive, and each film will be available to watch for 2 weeks leading up to the discussion. So you can check our website calendar at moadsf.org for the details. Please, if you can, take a few minutes to fill out the online survey about today's program. I put a link to it in the chat, and I think it'll pop up when when you close your browser or when you close the Zoom window. We do appreciate you coming to the program today, and again, apologize for the audio challenges. I hope you were all able to hear. Thank you all. Please stay safe and have happy holidays and pleasant holiday season. Thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Bye.